Today we're going to be reviewing lessons 3.1 through 3.3. This is for algebra. The first question is we're going to have to decide whether this equation is a linear equation. And if it is, we're going to need to write it in standard form. So there are a couple criteria that you want to cross off when you're trying to determine whether it's linear. And so far we've learned that if it has any variable with an exponent of a 2, so squared, then it would not be a linear equation. Also, it will not be a linear equation if any of the variables are multiplied together, such as if the first part here in this equation was yx equals instead of y equals, then it would not be linear as well. So, since this fits the criteria and does not match any of the nonlinear criteria, then we can say that this is linear. And if it's linear, we need to write it in standard form. So we're going to write it in standard form by moving the x term to be with the y term. So we have y equals 3x minus 2. We need to take the entire x term and move it to be with the y term. So we need to subtract it from this side. And whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. So I'm also subtracting. And then I need to rewrite y minus 3x equals negative 2. And now that I've had x and y on the same side, this would be in standard form. Next question, what is the y-intercept when 2x minus 3y equals negative 18? The y-intercept, or any intercept that you're finding, you need to plug in 0 into the other variable. So if we're finding the y-intercept, we need to plug in 0 for x. And vice versa, if we're finding the x-intercept, we would need to plug in 0 for y. So in this case, we're finding the y-intercept, so we need to plug in 0 for x and solve for y. So I have 2 times 0, or 0, minus 3y equals negative 18. So 0 doesn't need to be written there, so I have negative 3y equals negative 18, so I need to divide by negative 3 to get y by itself. So y would be positive 6, and this would be the y-intercept. I could also write this as an ordered pair if I'm asked to graph using this, but I'm not asked to graph. Whoops. And so the ordered pair would be 0, 6. Because whatever intercept you're finding, that's where you're going to put the number in. So since it's a y-intercept, I put 6 in for y. And then since I put 0 in for x to find that in my ordered pair, 0 is my x-coordinate. So that would be my answer. Next problem is they give us an equation here that represents the distance d in miles that a car is traveling in t hours. So it gives us the rate of 65 miles per hour, and the equation is d equals 65t. So if we're thinking about d equals 65t, d represents distance, t represents time. So it says, what is the best estimate of how far a car travels in 10 hours? The 10, since it's time, is going to go in for t, and I'm going to multiply to get d is 65 times 10, or 650. And d represented miles, so this would be 650 miles. So it's only a matter of plugging in 10 into the correct variable for what it stands for. So this would be my answer. The next one I'm going to graph. You can graph these a few different ways. There's using the y and x intercept, and there's also making a table. Both ways would be equally as simple. So let's start with the y and x intercepts. if I were to graph using those, I would need to find them first. So I have 2 times 0 if I'm finding my y-intercept, or negative y equals 2, so y would equal to negative 2, because we'd have to divide by negative 1 here. So my point would be 0, negative 2. Then I'd also have to do this to find the x-intercept, so I'm going to plug in 0 for y. And I get 2x equals 2. Sorry, that was my dog wanting to play catch. I divide by 2 on both sides to get x equals 1, and the ordered pair then would be 1, 0. So what I'd do is I'd plot both of these ordered pairs on a graph. And they will provide the graphs for you on the quiz. You would just need to plot these 2 points. So if I were to plot these points on the graph, this is my x-axis, this is my y-axis. I would go to 1, 0, and plot that point, and then I'd go to 0, negative 2, and plot that point, and then I'd draw my line through the points. And that would be my graph. So that's one way of doing this equation. Another way of doing this equation, graphing this equation, is to make a t-chart or a table. You need at least 2 values of x that you come up with, and then you're going to plug those into into x to find y. So we've actually already done what 0 into x is, which is negative 2. And then I would just find what 1 is when I plug it in for x. So I have 2 minus y equals 2. I'm going to have to solve for y. So negative y equals 0. So y would be 0. So these would be my 2 points that I'd graph from the table. And this actually worked out to be the x and y intercepts, which doesn't usually happen, but this has happened. So we would graph them. So I'd go to 1, 0 and put a point, and then I'd go to 0, negative 2 and put a point, and connect my 2 points with a line. And that would be my graph using a table. Now, when we were asked to solve a problem like this, we were also given the option to solve by graphing. This is actually not even giving us that option, so you just need to solve for x here, which would be to add 55 to both sides to get x by itself. And then I'd have 5x equals 55, and divide by 5 to get x equals 11. And that is all I would have to do for a problem like this. Next, I'm asked to find the slope, and I'm given 2 points. So I need to remember that the slope is subtracting the y coordinates over subtracting the x coordinates. So I'm going to take the 9 and the 7 and subtract those. Since I started out with the 9, I'm going to use the 6 for my first term for my x values. So 6 minus negative 5. Also, something to keep in mind, slope is always subtraction, so it already starts out as subtracting, so that's why I needed to subtract a negative, which actually turns into addition. So I end up with 2 over 11, So I'm going to take that ratio and I'm going to equal that to the slope that they gave me, which was 4/3. So 8 over 4 minus r equals 4 over 3. And then I'm going to solve for r by cross-multiplying to get 8 times 3 is 24 equals 4 times 4 minus r. So I'm going to need to distribute that 4. 24 then equals 16 minus 4r. So I'm solving for r here. So then I would need to subtract 16, which gives me 8 equals negative 4r, and divide by negative 4, which would give me r equals negative 2. So I basically set this up using the slope formula, and then I cross-multiplied and solved it like I would a proportion to find r. Here I need to determine whether the function is linear. So to use the shortcut, you want to look at the pattern of the y values, and if there's the same pattern between the values of either an addition or a subtraction pattern, then it's going to be linear. So I need to figure out how do I get from 1 to negative 1. I would have to subtract 2, so that's the pattern. And then from negative 1 back to positive 1, I would have to add 2. So you could see that negative 2 or minus 2 and plus 2 are not the same, even though they are both 2. One needs to be plus, so the other one would need to be plus, or vice versa. One, if it starts as minus, the other one would need to be minus, and it would be the same pattern throughout. So for it to be linear, it would have needed to be minus 2, then another minus 2 as my pattern, but instead it's minus 2 as the first pattern and plus 2 as the second pattern. So this would be not a linear function. And the last problem we're going to do is another way of finding slope, which they call rate of change. So it says in 2000 there were approximately 300 students in the Paint Branch High School band. In 2006, that number increased to 330. We need to find the rate of change. Oh, that says Chong. Whoops. In the number of students. So we need to think about what rate of change is, which is slope. So with slope, we need 2 ordered pairs. So we need to think of the numbers as being ordered pairs. So we have 2004, comma 2006. Actually, I think it was 2000. So 2000, comma 300. That's our first set of information. And then we're given 2006, comma 330. And the reason why I knew that 2000 and 2006 were our x-coordinates in the ordered pairs is that they are both dealing with time. Time is always an x variable because it is always going to be independent and not rely on anything else. So now that I have my 2 ordered pairs, I'm going to use the slope formula to find my rate of change. And subtract my y-coordinates over my x-coordinates. So I get 300 minus 330 minus 300, which is 30, over 2006 minus 2000, which is 6. So I can actually simplify that to 5 over 1, or just 5. So my rate of change would be 5. And that concludes our review quiz.